My name is Nora Bennett, and am 32 years old. The moment my sister Diane stood up at Thanksgiving dinner, wine glass raised, smirking as she announced to our entire family that I was still desperately single at 32. Something inside me snapped. The table went silent. My mother looked away. My father buried his face in his napkin. Diane's husband Preston shifted uncomfortably, but Diane just kept smiling, that perfect, practiced smile she'd perfected over the years. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to shrink, to apologize for my existence, to feel small. Instead, I stood up, looked her directly in the eyes, and said the words that would detonate her perfect life. Before we dive into what happened next, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Have you ever had a family member try to humiliate you in public? Hit that like button if you're ready for a story about standing up for yourself, and don't forget to subscribe because this gets intense. Trust me, you'll want to hear how my sister's cruel joke backfired in the most spectacular way possible. 2 weeks before that explosive Thanksgiving dinner, my life looked nothing like the disaster my family believed it to be. I was a marketing director at a prestigious firm in Chicago, leading campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, living in a beautiful apartment overlooking the lake, traveling whenever I wanted. I was content, fulfilled even. But to my family, specifically to my parents, Marjorie and Howard, none of that mattered because I didn't have a husband and 2.5 children in a suburban house. My sister Diane had checked all those boxes 8 years ago when she married Preston, a construction company owner with family money and the kind of conventional good looks that photograph well. They had 2 children, Lucy, who was 6, and Mason, who was 4. Diane had transformed herself into what she considered the ultimate achievement. A stay-at-home mother who also ran a consulting business from home, served as PTA president, and maintained an Instagram account with over 15,000 followers documenting her apparently flawless life. Every post was the same carefully curated perfection: smiling children in coordinated outfits, pristine kitchen counters with fresh flowers, motivational quotes about motherhood and marriage. The comments always gushed about how lucky she was, how beautiful her family was, how she had it all figured out. Our family dynamics had been established early. Diane was 3 years older than me, and from childhood, she'd been the golden child. She followed rules. She brought home perfect report cards. She dated the right boys. She chose the acceptable college major. She married young. My parents, particularly my mother, held her up as the standard I should aspire to meet. I, on the other hand, had always been different. I asked too many questions. I challenged expectations. I chose my career over early marriage. I dated people my mother didn't approve of. I moved to a big city instead of staying close to home. Every family gathering became an opportunity for passive-aggressive commentary. My mother would sigh heavily when I arrived alone, making pointed remarks about my biological clock as if my uterus had an expiration date stamped on it. My father would ask vague questions about my job, clearly not understanding or caring what I actually did, then change the subject to talk about Preston's latest construction project. Diane would perform concern, asking invasive questions about my dating life in front of everyone, feigning sisterly interest while actually twisting the knife. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Id received a text from Diane. "Hey sis, really hope you can make it this year. Maybe bring someone special? Mom and Dad would love that. It would mean so much to them." The subtext was clear: show up with a man or face judgment. Id ignored the text, knowing that engaging would only encourage more pressure. What I didn't tell anyone was that Id actually seen something troubling 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. I'd been at an upscale restaurant downtown for a client dinner when I spotted Preston at a corner table. He wasn't alone. He was with a woman I didn't recognize, someone much younger than Diane, with auburn hair and a bright laugh that carried across the restaurant. They were holding hands across the table. When she got up to use the restroom, he watched her walk away with an expression I'd never seen him direct at my sister. It was intimate, unmistakable. Id sat frozen, unsure what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately. Part of me wondered if I should tell Diane. But ultimately, Id convinced myself it wasn't my business. Their marriage, their problems. I had enough to deal with preparing myself mentally for the inevitable interrogation that awaited me at Thanksgiving dinner. I told myself I'd survive the holiday, deflect the questions, and escape back to my real life as quickly as possible. I arrived at my parents' house in Connecticut around 2 in the afternoon on Thanksgiving Day. The colonial-style home looked exactly as it had my entire childhood, perfectly maintained with its neat hedges and seasonal wreath on the front door. Before I could even get my bag from the trunk, Diane appeared on the front porch. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater and designer jeans, her hair blown out in perfect waves, her makeup flawless. "Oh, good, you came alone again," she announced loudly enough for everyone inside to hear. It wasn't a question, it was a proclamation, an opening salvo. I forced a smile and walked past her into the house where the rest of the family had already gathered. My mother Marjorie was in the kitchen arranging appetizers on serving platters. My father Howard sat in his usual chair reading the newspaper. My Aunt Colleen and Uncle Floyd had driven up from New Jersey and were camped out on the sofa. My cousin Tessa was there with her new fiancé, a guy named Derek who looked uncomfortable and out of place. The house smelled like roasting turkey and cinnamon, smells that should have been comforting but instead made my stomach tighten with anxiety. Diane took control of the afternoon immediately. She orchestrated where everyone would sit, making a show of the seating arrangements like she was planning a state dinner. When it came time to gather in the dining room for appetizers, I realized Shed positioned me at the far end of the table, squeezed between her 4-year-old son Mason's booster seat and an empty chair. Everyone else was clustered at the other end where the adult conversation would happen. It was deliberate, a power move designed to make me feel excluded and childish. As we nibbled on cheese and crackers, Diane started in with her questions. "So Nora, any interesting dates lately?" Her voice was syrupy sweet, but her eyes glittered with something else. "Malice, maybe. Or schadenfreude. Not really," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I've been focused on work. We just landed a huge account." Diane laughed, a tinkling sound that felt like broken glass. "Oh, work! That's always your answer, isn't it? You know, at some point you have to actually live your life, not just build your career. Don't you want what I have? A family? Someone to come home to?" The table had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. My mother jumped in with her own commentary. "Diane's right, sweetheart. You're not getting any younger. I read an article about fertility after 35. It drops off a cliff. You really should start thinking about these things." Uncle Floyd shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Colleen nodded in agreement. My father rustled his newspaper but said nothing. Preston, Diana's husband, stared intently at his plate, his jaw tight. Something about his discomfort struck me as odd. Tessa glanced at me sympathetically but didn't speak up. Her fiancé Derek looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Diane continued her assault, emboldened by my mother's support. "I mean, there's nothing wrong with being single if that's what you choose. But you're not choosing it, are you? You're just too picky. You've always been too picky. Remember in high school when you turned down Tommy Fletcher? Has a dentist now, married with 3 kids. You could have had that." She gestured around the table as if her life was the prize I'd foolishly rejected. I felt heat rising in my chest, crawling up my neck. My hands clenched under the table. But I held back. I told myself to breathe, to let it go, to survive this dinner and escape. Then Diane's daughter Lucy, the 6-year-old, piped up from across the table in her small, clear voice. "Aunt Nora, why don't you have a husband like Mommy does?" The question hung in the air. It should have sounded innocent, the simple curiosity of a child. But the way Diane smiled, the satisfied curve of her lips, told me everything. Shed coached Lucy to ask this. Shed planted the question deliberately. It was calculated cruelty disguised as childhood innocence. The room waited for my response. My mother looked at me expectantly. My father finally lowered his newspaper. Diana's smile widened. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. No response would satisfy them. Anything I said would be wrong. If I deflected, it'd look defensive. If I answered honestly, it'd be accused of being bitter. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I'm going to help in the kitchen," I muttered, not looking at anyone. As I walked away, I heard Diane's voice behind me, pitched just loud enough for me to hear. She was talking to Tessa. "She's so sensitive. I'm just trying to help her. Someone needs to give her a reality check before it's too late. I mean, what's she waiting for? Prince Charming." By the time we all gathered for the main meal, I'd composed myself. I'd splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom, given myself a stern talking to in the mirror, and resolved to get through the dinner without incident. The dining room table was set beautifully with my mother's good china and crystal glasses. The turkey sat golden and gleaming at the center, surrounded by all the traditional sides. We took our seats, the same awkward arrangement from earlier. My father stood to carve the turkey while the rest of us passed dishes and filled our plates. For a few minutes there was only the clatter of silverware and murmured requests to pass the gravy or stuffing. Then Diane stood up, raising her wine glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced. Everyone paused, glasses in hand, expecting the usual expression of gratitude. But Diane had other plans. "Let's be thankful for the blessings we have. For family, for love, for the people who stood by us and built lives with us. Let's be grateful that some of us found our person, our soulmate, our other half." She paused dramatically, her eyes landing on me. "And let's hope that those of us still searching will someday know what it's like to be truly loved." Nora, sweetheart, 32 and still single. Don't you ever want what Preston and I have? Don't you want a family? Children? Or are you just going to work yourself to death alone? The words landed like physical blows. The room erupted in awkward laughter, the nervous kind that people use to diffuse tension when they don't know what else to do. My mother giggled. Uncle Floyd chuckled. Aunt Colleen shook her head with a pitying expression. My father looked stern but said nothing. Tessa stared at her plate. Preston's knuckles were white around his fork, and Diane just stood there, triumphant, waiting for me to crumble. Something inside me broke. Not in the way she wanted, not in a collapse or tears. It broke in the way a dam breaks, releasing everything it'd been holding back. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor again. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out steady and cold. "Diane, you really want to talk about relationships right now? You want to discuss what it means to be loved, to have a partner you can trust." The room went silent. Diane's smile faltered. "You want everyone here to know about real marriages, honest marriages? Then let's talk about yours." I turned to face Preston directly. 3 weeks ago, I was at Marcello's downtown. That Italian place on 5th Street. I saw you there. Tuesday night, around 8 o'clock. You were wearing that blue shirt Diane gave you for your birthday. You were with someone. Preston's face drained of all color. The fork slipped from his hand, clattering against his plate. Diane's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I continued, my voice gaining strength. "She was younger than you. Auburn hair, pretty, laughing at everything you said. You were holding her hand across the table. When she got up, you watched her like you've never looked at anyone else in this room. Her name is Bridget, isn't it? Bridget from your office." The silence in the room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. My mother gasped. Uncle Floyd's eyes went wide. Aunt Colleen's hand flew to her mouth. Tessa looked between Diane and Preston in shock. Even little Lucy sensed something terrible was happening and stopped playing with her food. Diane recovered first, but her recovery was fury. Her face flushed deep red, her perfectly composed expression shattering into something ugly. "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you make up lies about my husband, about my marriage, just because you're jealous? This is pathetic, Nora. Even for you." She turned to the rest of the table, playing to her audience. "This is what bitterness looks like. This is what happens when someone is so miserable in their own life that they have to try to destroy everyone else's happiness. She's lying. She's making this up because she can't stand that I have everything she'll never have." Preston was shaking his head, but he couldn't form words. His mouth opened and closed uselessly. I pressed on, refusing to let Diane rewrite reality. "I saw you, Preston. I watched you for 20 minutes before my client arrived. I saw how you touched her arm. I saw you pay the check. I saw you leave together. You walked to the parking garage with your arm around her waist. The details hung in the air, specific and damning." Preston finally found his voice, but it came out as a pathetic stammer. "Nora, you don't understand. It's not what you think. She's just a colleague. We were discussing a project." My father Howard set down his carving knife with a heavy thud. "Preston, is this true?" Preston's silence was answer enough. Diane whirled on him, her performance switching seamlessly from righteous indignation to betrayed wife. "Preston, tell them she's lying. Tell them this is ridiculous." But Preston couldn't meet her eyes. Diane's facade cracked further. She turned back to me, her voice rising to a shriek. "You've ruined Thanksgiving. You've ruined everything. You're so bitter and jealous that you had to bring this poison into our family gathering. Mom, Dad, tell her to leave. Tell her she can't do this. But my mother was staring at Preston with dawning horror. My father's face was carved from stone. The illusion of Diane's perfect life was shattering in real time, and everyone could see the cracks spreading. I sat back down slowly, my hands still shaking but my voice calm. I didn't want to say anything. I convinced myself it wasn't my business. But you pushed, Diane. You pushed and pushed, trying to humiliate me for being single, trying to make me feel less than because I don't have what you have. Well, now everyone knows what you have. A cheating husband and a marriage built on lies. I left my parents' house 20 minutes later, shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. Behind me, I could hear raised voices, Diane's hysterical crying, Preston's weak attempts at explanation, my mother's shrill demands for answers. I didn't stay to watch the explosion it detonated. I drove to the nearest hotel, booked a room, and collapsed on the bed with my phone buzzing incessantly in my purse. I didn't look at it for an hour. When I finally gathered the courage to check, I found 37 text messages and 12 missed calls. My mother had sent 5 messages, each more accusatory than the last. How could you do this to your sister? On Thanksgiving of all days. You've always been selfish, Nora, but this is beyond cruel. Diane is devastated. I hope you're happy. Your father and I are ashamed of you. Don't bother coming to Christmas. You're not welcome. Aunt Colleen had weighed in with her judgment. This was completely inappropriate timing. Whatever issues they have should have been handled privately. You embarrassed the entire family. Uncle Floyd's message was shorter but no less condemning. Really disappointed in you, kiddo. That wasn't the way to handle things. Cousin Tessa sent a hesitant message. I don't know what to say. This is all so crazy. Why would you bring this up at dinner? Even extended relatives I barely knew had opinions. Their messages filtered through the family group chat it'd been hastily removed from. The only supportive message came from my childhood friend Hazel, who hadn't been at dinner but had apparently heard through the family grapevine already. Just heard what happened. Are you okay? I'm here if you need to talk. For what it's worth, I think Diane had this coming. She's been horrible to you for years. I clutched my phone, reading and rereading her message, feeling like it was the only lifeline in a sea of condemnation. Then I checked social media, a mistake I immediately regretted. Diane had posted 40 minutes ago a cryptic message that was clearly aimed at me, even without naming names. Sometimes the people you love most are the ones who hurt you deepest. Family betrayal cuts differently, but Well survived this stronger than ever. The post already had dozens of comments, friends and acquaintances offering support, asking if she was okay, sending prayer emojis and hearts. People who didn't know the full story were rallying around her, and she was controlling the narrative. I was being painted as the villain in her story. My phone rang. Preston's name flashed on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. What do you want? My voice came out harsh, defensive. Preston's voice was tight, angry despite his attempt to sound reasonable. Nora, you need to stay out of our marriage. What you did tonight was unforgivable. Yes, I made a mistake. Yes, I've been seeing someone. But that's between Diane and me. You had no right to air our private business in front of the entire family. I laughed bitterly. Your mistake? You've been having an affair, Preston. How long? Silence. Then, quietly, 14 months. The number hit me like a punch. 14 months. Over a year of lies. Over a year of Diane posting happy family photos online while her husband was with another woman. Who is she? I asked, though I already knew the name. Bridget Walsh. She works in my office. She's 26. It just happened, Nora. These things happen. But you exposing it like that, in front of everyone, that was cruel. You've destroyed any chance Diane and I had of working through this privately. The audacity of his words left me speechless for a moment. He was actually trying to make me feel guilty. I destroyed your chance? Preston, you destroyed your marriage the moment you started sleeping with someone else. Don't put this on me. He sighed heavily. Diane is a mess. Your mother is furious. Your father wants you to apologize. This whole thing is a disaster, and it's your fault. I hung up without responding. 30 minutes later, my father called. I let it go to voicemail, but he called back immediately. On the third attempt, I answered. Dad. His voice was stern. the tone Head used when I was a child and had broken some household rule. Nora, you need to apologize to your sister. What you did tonight was inappropriate and hurtful. Whatever Preston did or didn't do, that was not the time or place to bring it up. You embarrassed this family. I closed my eyes, feeling tears prick behind my eyelids. Dad, she spent the entire day mocking me. She coached Lucy to ask why I don't have a husband. She proposed a toast specifically to humiliate me. She's been doing this for years. My father's voice didn't soften. Your sister cares about you. She wants you to be happy. If you felt attacked, you should have spoken to her privately, not blown up her marriage in front of everyone. You owe her an apology. Preston too. Hez family. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, going in circles, but the message was clear. My family had chosen sides, and they hadn't chosen mine. I was expected to apologize for exposing the truth while Preston's affair was treated as a private matter I should have ignored. When I finally hung up, I felt simultaneously liberated and devastated. I sat alone in that hotel room, ordering room service I couldn't eat, questioning everything. Had I done the right thing? Was my father correct that I should have handled it differently? But every time I replayed Diane's smug face, her calculated cruelty, the way Shed spent years making me feel inadequate, I felt the anger return. Shed pushed me to that breaking point deliberately. She just hadn't expected me to push back. I returned to Chicago 3 days later, hoping distance would provide perspective and peace. I was wrong. Diane had spent those 3 days launching a calculated campaign to destroy my reputation and reframe the narrative completely in her favor. The first sign came when cousin Tessa sent me screenshots from the family group chat it'd been removed from. The messages painted a disturbing picture of Diana's strategy. Shed spent hours crafting a story where I was the villain, jealous and unstable, inventing an affair to hurt her perfect marriage. I think Nora might be having some kind of breakdown, Diane had written. She's always been jealous of what Preston and I have. Ever since we got married, she's made little comments, tried to create problems. I think being single at her age has made her bitter. She sees our happiness and it eats at her. My mother had responded with enthusiastic agreement. I've been worried about Nora's mental state for months. She seems so angry all the time. Maybe we should stage some kind of intervention. The messages continued, Diane dredging up old childhood stories and twisting them to support her narrative. Remember when we were teenagers and I started dating Preston's friend first, but then Nora tried to flirt with him at my birthday party? She's always wanted what I have. Remember when I got into Yale and she threw a fit because she only got into a state school? She's always been competitive with me, always trying to tear me down. The lies were so elaborate, so detailed, that I barely recognized the version of myself she was creating. Stories from our childhood were being rewritten with me as the jealous, difficult sister and Diane as the long-suffering victim of my envy. Family members who didn't know better were buying it completely. Aunt Colleen wrote, "Oh, Diane, I'm so sorry you've had to deal with this for so long. We never realized how deep Nora's problems went." Uncle Floyd added, "That explains a lot, actually. Some of the things she said over the years make more sense now." Even my father, who should have known better, seemed to be accepting Diane's version. "Your sister has always been sensitive about Diane's success. We probably should have addressed this years ago." The only person pushing back was Tessa, bless her, who wrote tentatively, "But what if Nora was telling the truth? What if Preston really was having an affair?" Diane's response was swift and vicious. "He wasn't. We've talked about it. He was meeting with Bridget about a work project. Nora saw them and jumped to conclusions because she wanted it to be true. She wanted to believe my marriage was failing because she can't stand that I'm happy." My phone rang while I was reading these messages. It was Uncle Floyd. "Nora, honey, your sister is talking about getting a restraining order. She says she's afraid of what you might do next. Maybe you should talk to someone, get some help. This kind of behavior isn't healthy." A restraining order. Diane was actually threatening legal action against me for telling the truth. I tried to explain what I'd seen, the details, the timeline, but Uncle Floyd just sighed heavily. "Sweetie, sometimes when we want something to be true, we convince ourselves we saw things that didn't happen. It's okay. We're not mad. We just want you to get help." The conversation left me feeling gaseous. Within days, the poison Diane was spreading started affecting my professional life. My mother, in what I can only describe as an act of spectacular boundary violation, called my office claiming there was a family emergency and asking to speak to my supervisor. My boss, Lauren, pulled me aside later that week. "Nora, is everything okay at home? Your mother called saying she's worried about you, that you've been under a lot of stress. She wanted me to know in case your work performance started to slip." I was mortified. I explained briefly that there was family drama but nothing that would affect my work. Lauren seemed satisfied but concerned, and I left her office feeling the walls closing in. Diana's social media campaign continued. She posted carefully crafted messages that never mentioned me by name but made her victimhood clear. When someone you love betrays you, it cuts deeper than any stranger's words ever could. But I'm choosing to focus on my beautiful family, my amazing husband, and the people who truly support us. The comments poured in. Friends, acquaintances, people from her PTA, her church group, her yoga class, all expressing sympathy and outrage on her behalf. Some started following me, leaving subtle digs on my posts. "Must be nice to have so much free time since you're not busy with family responsibilities. Career success means nothing if you're alone." Diane even reached out to mutual friends we'd had since childhood. People I hadn't spoken to in years but still followed on social media. She sent them private messages, I learned later, sharing her version of events. Several of them blocked me without explanation. Others sent me concerned messages asking if I was okay, if I needed to talk to someone, clearly implying they thought I was unstable. The isolation was systematic and devastating. Then came the masterstroke of Diana's manipulation. Preston moved back home. She posted a family photo 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, all 4 of them in matching pajamas in front of their Christmas tree. The caption reading, "Stronger than ever. Some storms make you appreciate the sunshine, grateful for second chances and unconditional love." The message was clear to anyone following the drama. They'd weathered my false accusations, their marriage had survived, and they were presenting a united front. Shed successfully reframed Preston's affair as my invention, a jealous fantasy, and their reconciliation as proof of my dishonesty. Comments flooded in congratulating them, praising their strength, admiring their commitment to family. No one seemed to question why they'd needed to reconcile if there had never been an affair in the first place. The cognitive dissonance didn't matter. Diane's performance was too polished, too perfect. My friend Hazel came to visit me in Chicago that weekend. We sat in my apartment with wine and takeout, and she listened to everything that had happened. "You need evidence," she finally said. "Real, concrete evidence that can't be denied or explained away. Otherwise, it's your word against theirs, and they've already won the PR battle." She was right. I'd spoken my truth, but without proof, it was just an accusation from the bitter single sister. Diane had successfully painted me as unstable and jealous. If I wanted to fight back, if I wanted to reclaim my reputation and force my family to see reality, I needed more than what I'd seen at a restaurant. I needed documentation. I needed facts that couldn't be twisted or dismissed. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt a spark of determination, instead of just shame and hurt. This wasn't over. Diane wanted a war. Fine. I'd give her one. The next morning, I started building my case. I drove back to Marcello's, the Italian restaurant where I'd seen Preston and Bridget. The lunch shift was quiet, and I asked to speak with the manager, a kind-faced woman named Isabella who remembered me as a semi-regular customer. I explained carefully that I needed information about a party that had dined there 3 weeks prior, and why. She was hesitant at first, citing privacy policies, but when I explained the situation honestly, her expression softened. "Hold on," she said, disappearing into the back office. She returned with printed receipts. "This is the couple you described? Tuesday nights, same table. They've been coming here for months, at least 6 months that I can verify." She showed me receipts going back to May. Always the same credit card. Preston's name printed clearly at the bottom. Always 2 entrees, wine, dessert. Always Tuesday evenings between 7 and 9. The pattern was undeniable. I asked if anyone would be willing to provide a statement, and she gave me the name of their regular server, Marco, who agreed to meet me the next day. Marco was a college student working his way through school, and he was surprisingly forthcoming once I explained the situation. "Yeah, I remember them. They were definitely a couple. Very affectionate. He always held her hand. They'd share dessert. One time they were kissing when I came to refill water glasses. It was kind of awkward, actually. He provided dates, descriptions, even remembered specific conversations Head overheard. She called him baby a lot. He told her once that he wished they could do this every night instead of hiding. That stuck with me because it seemed sad. I asked if He'd be willing to write down what he remembered and sign it. He agreed, and I walked out of that restaurant with a folder of receipts and a signed statement from a credible witness who had no reason to lie. Next, I called Marshall, a friend from college who'd gone into private investigation work. We'd stayed in loose touch over the years, and when I explained what I needed, he agreed to help. This is pretty straightforward infidelity documentation. Give me a week. 5 days later, Marshall sent me a comprehensive file. Head followed Preston and Bridget, documenting their routine. They met every Tuesday and Thursday. Tuesdays were dinner at Marcello's. Thursdays, Preston would pick Bridget up from his office, and they'd drive to an apartment building across town. Marshall had dug deeper and found a lease agreement. Preston had rented a one-bedroom apartment 14 months ago, the lease in his name only, paid from an account Diane apparently didn't have access to. The apartment was their private space, somewhere they could be together without fear of discovery. Marshall had photographs. Preston and Bridget entering the building together, leaving separately hours later, kissing in his car. The evidence was damning and incontrovertible. Marshall had also identified Bridget Walsh fully. She was 26, worked as a project manager at Preston's construction company, had been employed there for 2 years. The timeline suggested the affair had started about 6 months after she was hired. The power dynamic made it even worse. She was his employee, someone whose career prospects he controlled. Marshall raised his eyebrows when he presented this information. This could be a workplace violation. If the affair started because of pressure or implied career advancement, he could be in serious legal trouble. Even if it was consensual, having a relationship with a direct report is usually against company policy. I absorbed all of this, building my case piece by piece, but I needed more. I needed something that would explain why Diane had reacted the way she did, why she'd launched such a vicious counterattack instead of simply confronting the truth. The answer came from an unexpected source. Preston's brother Garrett called me out of the blue on a Saturday afternoon. "Nora, we need to talk. Can we meet somewhere?" His voice was tense, urgent. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment, and Garrett looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "I can't stay quiet about this anymore," he said. "What Preston did was wrong. The affair, the lying, all of it. But what Diane's been doing to you is worse." He pulled out his phone and showed me text messages between Diane and Preston, messages Head found on Preston's laptop. The messages went back 6 months, to early June. "I know about Bridget," Diane had written. "We need to talk about how we're going to handle this." Preston's response: "How long have you known?" Diane: "Long enough." "Well, discuss terms." The messages that followed made my stomach turn. Diane had known about the affair for 6 months. She'd known and said nothing, instead using it as leverage in their marriage. She'd demanded Preston increase her monthly allowance. She'd insisted on a larger vehicle. She'd made him transfer money into accounts he didn't have access to. She was essentially blackmailing him, using his guilt and fear of exposure to extort financial concessions. Garrett's hands shook as he scrolled through more messages. "There's more. She's been stealing from the business." He showed me bank statements, transaction records. Diana's consulting business, which she ran from home, was supposedly legitimate. But Garrett had done some digging after Preston confided in him, and the truth was uglier. Diane had been invoicing Preston's construction company for services never rendered, funneling money from the business account into personal accounts under her mother's name. Over the past 2 years, she'd embezzled more than $200,000. Preston was too afraid to confront her because of the affair. He thought if he accused her of theft, she'd expose him and take the kids. She had all the power. Garrett looked at me with something like desperation. "Preston's a cheater and a coward, but Diane is calculating. She's been planning her exit strategy for months, building up secret funds, preparing to leave with a financial cushion. Your exposing the affair at Thanksgiving ruined her timeline. She wasn't ready to leave yet. That's why she went nuclear on you. You forced her hand before she was prepared." The revelation recontextualized everything. Diane hadn't been the devastated wife blindsided by betrayal. She'd been the puppet master, controlling the situation, using Preston's guilt to her advantage while stealing from him systematically. My public exposure hadn't just embarrassed her. It had disrupted her carefully laid plans. Garrett provided copies of everything: the text messages, the bank statements, the invoicing records, documentation of the embezzlement. "I feel guilty even showing you this," he admitted. "Preston's my brother, but what Diane's doing to you isn't right. And someone needs to stop her before she destroys more lives." I thanked him, my hands full of evidence that would blow Diane's victim narrative apart. I had proof of the affair stretching back over a year. I had proof she'd known for 6 months and used it for financial gain. I had proof she'd been stealing from Preston's business. This wasn't just about defending myself anymore. This was about exposing a level of manipulation and deceit that went far beyond anything I'd imagined when I'd stood up at that Thanksgiving dinner. I requested a family meeting 2 weeks later, sending a carefully worded email to my parents, Diane, Preston, and key extended family members. "I have information that needs to be shared with everyone. I'm requesting we meet this Saturday at 2 at Mom and Dad's house. This concerns Diane, Preston, and the accusations that have been made against me. Please come with an open mind," my mother called immediately, her voice sharp. "If you're planning another scene, Nora, don't bother. We're not interested in more drama." I kept my voice calm. "Mom, I have documentation, evidence, real proof. If Diane is telling the truth and I made everything up, this meeting will clear her name completely. If she has nothing to hide, she should want this." The logic was sound enough that my mother reluctantly agreed. Saturday arrived cold and gray, threatening snow. I drove to Connecticut with my lawyer friend Joanna, who'd agreed to accompany me as a witness and provide legal perspective if needed. We arrived to find the entire family already gathered, the living room crowded with people sitting on every available surface. Diane sat on the sofa flanked by Preston and my mother, a united front of righteousness. My father stood by the fireplace looking stern. Aunt Colleen, Uncle Floyd, and Cousin Tessa were arranged on chairs. Several family members had joined by video call on my father's laptop, their faces in small squares on the screen. The atmosphere was hostile. Diane's eyes were red-rimmed, her expression one of wounded dignity. Shed, dressed carefully in soft colors, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She looked vulnerable and sympathetic. Preston sat rigid beside her, his jaw tight. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. I set my folder of documents on the coffee table and introduced Joanna, explaining she was there in a professional capacity. "Before we begin, I want to say that I didn't want any of this. I didn't want to expose Preston's affair at Thanksgiving. I didn't want to humiliate anyone, but I was pushed repeatedly, mocked for being single, treated like I was less than because I don't have a husband and children. When I finally defended myself by telling the truth, I became the villain. So now we're going to look at the actual facts." I opened the folder and began distributing copies of documents. Restaurant receipts first, highlighting dates and Preston's credit card information. "These are from Marcello's, the restaurant where I saw Preston with Bridget Walsh. As you can see, they've been dining there together every Tuesday night since May. That's 7 months of weekly dates." Diane started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "I also have a signed statement from their regular server, who confirms they presented as a couple, holding hands, kissing, calling each other pet names." I passed around Marco's statement. Uncle Floyd read it, his expression darkening. Next came the photographs from Marshall's investigation. Preston and Bridget entering the apartment building, kissing in his car, walking hand in hand down the street. The lease agreement for the apartment Preston had rented. 14 months ago, Preston leased an apartment across town. The address is here. The lease is in his name only. This isn't a work project. This isn't a colleague meeting. This is a maintained relationship with dedicated space. The room had gone completely silent. Preston's face had drained of all color. He looked like he might be sick. Diane was frozen, her eyes darting between the documents and the faces around her. My mother's hand had flown to her throat. My father's expression had shifted from stern to shocked. I pressed on, my voice steady. "Now, let's talk about what Diane knew and when she knew it." I pulled out my phone and read from the screenshots Garrett had provided. The text messages between Diane and Preston, dated months before Thanksgiving. "I know about Bridget. We need to talk about how we're going to handle this." The room erupted. My mother gasped audibly. "You knew," she said, turning to Diane. "You've known for months." Diane's composure cracked. "I was trying to save my marriage. I was trying to handle it privately." It's complicated. You don't understand. But I wasn't finished. Diane didn't just know about the affair. She used it. She leveraged Preston's guilt to extort money from him. I distributed the bank statements next, the transaction records, the fraudulent invoices. Over the past 2 years, Diane has invoiced Preston's construction company for consulting services that were never rendered. She's transferred over $200,000 into accounts under Mom's name. I looked directly at my mother, whose face had gone pale. Did you know about these accounts, Mom? My mother shook her head mutely, clearly blindsided. The accounts were in her name, but Shed had no knowledge of them. Diane had used her mother's identity without permission to hide stolen money. Uncle Floyd was reading the bank statements with increasing agitation. This is fraud. This is actual criminal fraud. Diane found her voice finally, and it came out as a desperate mixture of anger and panic. You have no right to go through our private finances. This is between Preston and me. You're violating our privacy, twisting things to make me look bad because you're obsessed with destroying my life. But Joanna, my lawyer friend, spoke up calmly. Miss Bennett, these documents show clear evidence of embezzlement and financial fraud. The fact that accounts were opened under your mother's name without her knowledge adds identity theft to the charges. Your privacy doesn't protect you from criminal activity. The room exploded into overlapping voices. My father demanded explanations from Diane. Preston sat with his head in his hands. My mother was crying, asking why her name was on accounts Shed never opened. Aunt Colleen looked horrified. Cousin Tessa was staring at Diane like Shed never seen her before. Diane tried several tactics in rapid succession. First, she claimed the documents were forged, that I'd manufactured evidence because I was jealous. But the documentation was too thorough, too detailed, too easily verifiable. Then she tried to blame Preston entirely. He gave me that money. I didn't steal anything. He wanted me to have access to funds. Preston finally spoke, his voice hollow. No. You threatened to expose the affair and take the kids if I didn't give you money. You said you'd ruin me in the divorce. I was terrified. Diane whirled on him. You were cheating on me. You deserved to pay. The mask had fully slipped now. Her carefully maintained victim persona was gone, replaced by raw fury and desperation. She turned to my parents. This is all Nora's fault. If she hadn't said anything at Thanksgiving, none of this would have happened. We could have worked things out privately. She destroyed our family, but my father, who'd been silent through most of the revelations, finally spoke. No, Diane. You destroyed your own family, you and Preston both. These decisions, these lies, this theft, that's on you. Uncle Floyd stood up, his face set in grim lines. Nora, I owe you an apology. We all do. We should have listened to you from the start. Cousin Tessa was crying quietly. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry we didn't believe you. Even Aunt Colleen, who'd been so quick to judge, looked shaken and apologetic. The video call participants were weighing in, their tinny voices expressing shock and support for me. Diane looked around the room, seeing her support system crumbling, seeing the truth finally winning out over her carefully crafted narrative. She made one last desperate play. You're all turning on me because of lies and fake documents. This is a conspiracy. Nora probably bribed people to lie for her. She's always hated me. Ever since we were kids, she's been jealous. But no one was buying it anymore. The evidence was too overwhelming, too detailed, too easily corroborated. Joanna spoke again, her tone professional and detached. For the record, if this harassment of Miss Nora Bennett continues, if the defamation campaign on social media doesn't stop immediately, and if the embezzled funds are not returned, we'll be filing formal complaints with the appropriate authorities. This documentation will be shared with law enforcement and the IRS. The threat hung in the air. Diane had run out of moves. Her perfect life, her victim narrative, her campaign against me, all of it collapsed under the weight of documented truth. The week following our family confrontation brought consequences that rippled through everyone's lives like a stone thrown in still water. Preston filed for divorce within 3 days, moving out of the house and into a corporate apartment while he consulted with lawyers. His attorney made it clear they'd be seeking full custody of the children based on Diane's financial fraud and what they characterized as emotional manipulation. The affair would hurt Preston's case, certainly, but Diana's embezzlement and use of their mother's identity for illegal accounts hurt hers far more. The construction company launched an internal investigation, and Preston was forced to explain the fraudulent invoices to his business partner and accountant. The revelation damaged the company's reputation and required expensive legal consultation to navigate potential liability issues. Preston's relationship with Bridget ended abruptly, something his brother Garrett mentioned when we spoke briefly. Apparently, Bridget had no interest in staying with a man whose life was imploding in such spectacular fashion. Preston was left alone to face the consequences of his choices. Diane's carefully curated social media presence vanished overnight. The happy family photos, the inspirational quotes, the PTA updates, all deleted. Her accounts went private, then dormant. I heard through Tessa that Diane was staying with a friend, having moved out of the family home while divorce proceedings began. The consulting business Shed claimed to run was exposed as largely fictitious, existing primarily as a vehicle for embezzlement. Her reputation in the community, so important to her for years, was in ruins. People who'd admired her perfect life now whispered about fraud and deceit. The PTA position was quietly resigned. The yoga class friends stopped calling. The facade Shed maintained for so long had been completely demolished. My parents' marriage suffered its own damage. My father was furious with my mother, not for the accounts in her name since she genuinely hadn't known about them, but for her immediate and unwavering support of Diane throughout the ordeal. "You didn't even question her," Head said according to Tessa, who'd been at their house when the argument happened. "You just assumed Nora was lying, assumed the worst of your own daughter, because Diane's always been your favorite." It was the first time anyone had said out loud what I'd always known. The golden child dynamic that had shaped our family for decades was finally being acknowledged. My mother attempted to reach out to me with an apology that was, characteristically, more about her feelings than mine. "I feel terrible about how this all happened," Shed said on a voicemail message I'd listened to but not responded to. "I never meant for you to feel unsupported. I was just trying to hold the family together. You understand that, don't you?" I was in an impossible position. But she hadn't been in an impossible position. Shed made a choice to believe Diane without question, and to dismiss me without consideration. That wasn't impossible circumstances. That was favoritism and willful blindness. I wasn't ready to accept her apology, not when it came with built-in excuses and expectations that I'd simply move past it for the sake of family harmony. Extended family members reached out with varying degrees of sincerity. Uncle Floyd's apology felt genuine. He admitted He'd been wrong, that He'd let old family dynamics cloud his judgment, and that he should have listened to me from the start. "You've always been the truth-teller in this family," he said when we finally spoke on the phone. I should have remembered that. Aunt Colleen's apology was less satisfying, couched in language about how confusing the situation had been, and how Diane had been so convincing. She still seemed to think the main problem was my timing rather than the years of enabling that had allowed Diane to become who she'd become. I thanked her for reaching out but didn't invest energy in rebuilding that relationship. Cousin Tessa was genuinely remorseful. Shed sent a long email explaining that Shed'd been caught up in family pressure, that Shed wanted to believe Diane because the alternative was too ugly, and that she was ashamed of not defending me when it mattered. Her apology included specific acknowledgement of what Shed done wrong and what Shed learned from it. That felt worth salvaging, and we began tentatively rebuilding our relationship through careful conversations and clear boundaries. The friends who'd distanced themselves based on Diane's smear campaign had mixed reactions when the truth came out. Some reached out immediately with profuse apologies, embarrassed they'd been so easily manipulated. Others said nothing, perhaps too ashamed to acknowledge their role in my isolation, or perhaps revealing that they'd never been genuine friends in the first place. I made peace with the fact that some relationships weren't worth resurrecting. People who could so easily believe the worst of me without asking for my side of the story weren't people I needed in my life. I kept the relationships that had proven resilient. Hazel, who'd supported me from the beginning. Marshall, who'd helped me gather evidence. Joanna, who'd stood beside me in that confrontation. And Garrett, Preston's brother, who'd become an unexpected ally and friend through this nightmare. My workplace, thankfully, had taken my mother's interference seriously when I'd reported it. My boss, Lauren, had been supportive, making it clear that family drama wouldn't be allowed to impact my professional environment. The bizarre silver lining was that my handling of the crisis, my methodical gathering of evidence, my calm presentation under pressure, had actually impressed senior leadership. I was offered a promotion 3 weeks later to lead a new division, a career advancement I'd been working toward for years. At least professionally, I was thriving. Diana's new reality was harsh. Shed moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town, the kind of place she would have turned her nose up at months earlier. Shed found a part-time job at a marketing firm, entry-level work that paid a fraction of what Shed been living on when married to Preston. The children were spending most of their time with Preston, whose schedule was more stable and whose home environment wasn't tainted by ongoing legal issues. I heard through family channels that Diane was bitter, angry, blaming everyone but herself. Shed attempted to contact me multiple times, messages I deleted without reading, calls I didn't answer. Finally, a letter arrived at my apartment, forwarded from my parents' house. "We're still sisters," it read. "What happened was terrible, but we're family. We should be able to move past this." The letter was classic Diane, attempting reconciliation on her terms without acknowledging the years of cruelty or taking real responsibility. I didn't respond. My father reached out separately, and his approach was different. "I owe you an apology," he said, when we met for coffee in a neutral location. "I failed you. For years, I saw how your mother and Diane treated you, and I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I convinced myself you were strong enough to handle it, that you didn't need defending. But that was cowardice on my part. You deserved better from me." His apology was specific, genuine, without excuses. He didn't ask for immediate forgiveness or expect our relationship to return to normal overnight. He simply acknowledged what had done wrong and committed to doing better. That felt like something I could work with, slowly and carefully. My mother, in contrast, remained largely defensive. The few times we'd spoken, Shed focused on her own hurt feelings, her embarrassment in the community, her stress over Diana's situation. She seemed incapable of truly seeing my perspective or acknowledging the years of favoritism that had shaped our family's dysfunction. I maintained minimal contact with her, polite but distant, protecting myself from further disappointment. 3 months after that explosive Thanksgiving dinner, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The chaos had settled into a new normal, one built on authenticity rather than performance, on boundaries rather than obligation. I'd started therapy shortly after the confrontation, working with Dr. Helen, a psychologist who specialized in family trauma and narcissistic dynamics. The sessions were illuminating. We unpacked years of conditioning, the ways I'd learned to minimize my own needs to keep peace, the pattern of seeking approval from people who would never give it freely. Dr. Helen helped me understand that I'd been caught in a codependent dynamic where my role was to be the family scapegoat, absorbing criticism so Diane could be elevated. "You were assigned a part to play very early in life," she explained. "The underachiever, the difficult one, the one who needed fixing. These roles are powerful because the whole family system depends on everyone playing their part. When you broke character and told the truth, the entire system went into crisis." Understanding the psychology behind the dynamics didn't make the pain disappear, but it helped me stop blaming myself. I hadn't been wrong or deficient. I'd been trapped in a dysfunctional system that required my diminishment for others to feel superior. My professional life was thriving. The promotion I'd accepted came with new responsibilities that challenged and excited me. I was leading a team of 12 people, developing campaigns for major clients, traveling for presentations and strategy meetings. The work was demanding but fulfilling in ways that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. I was building something based on my skills and vision, and the recognition I received was earned rather than given. One of the projects brought me into contact with Graham, an architect whose firm was partnering with our client on an urban development campaign. Graham was 40, divorced, with a dry sense of humor and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. We started with professional conversations that evolved into coffee meetings, then dinners, then weekend plans. The relationship developed naturally, without pressure or timeline. I didn't mention him to my family for the first month we were seeing each other, protecting the fragile beginning from their judgment and commentary. When I did finally mention him casually to my father during one of our careful rebuilding conversations, I made it clear that my relationship status wasn't open for family discussion or investment. It was mine, private, separate from the dynamics that had caused so much damage. It also built what I thought of as my chosen family, a support system of people who showed up authentically and consistently. Hazel remained my closest friend, the one who'd believed me from the start and never wavered. We had standing Friday night dinners where we cooked elaborate meals and talked about everything and nothing. Marshall, the private investigator who'd helped me gather evidence, had become a good friend as well. We'd meet occasionally for drinks, swapping stories about his cases and my campaigns, enjoying each other's company without expectation. Joanna, my lawyer friend who'd accompanied me to the confrontation, invited me to join her book club, introducing me to a group of smart, funny women who became weekend brunch companions. And surprisingly, Garrett, Preston's brother, had become someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with. He carried guilt about his family's role in the drama, but he was working through it in therapy just as I was. We'd meet for coffee every few weeks, comparing notes on dysfunctional family navigation and celebrating small victories in setting boundaries. Thanksgiving rolled around again, nearly a full year after the explosive dinner that had changed everything. I declined the invitation to my parents' house, instead hosting what I called Friendsgiving at my apartment. Graham brought an expensive bottle of wine and stories about his daughter's latest school drama. Hazel made her famous pecan pie. Garrett contributed a playlist and his self-deprecating humor. Joanna brought her partner and enough cheese for an entire party. Marshall showed up with flowers and an impressive appetite. We gathered around my dining table, a mismatched group held together not by blood or obligation but by genuine affection and respect. When Graham suggested a toast, I raised my glass and looked around at these people who'd chosen to be in my life and whom I'd chosen in return. To people who show up authentically, I said. To friends who become family, to second chances and new beginnings. The glasses clinked, and I felt a peace I'd never experienced at family gatherings. This was what belonging felt like when it wasn't conditional. This was what love looked like when it didn't require you to be smaller than you were. I'd spent so many years believing that being single was my failure, that my worth was somehow diminished because I didn't have a husband and children by society's arbitrary deadline. Diane had weaponized that insecurity, using it to elevate herself while diminishing me. My parents had reinforced it with their disappointment and comparison, but the truth I'd learned through fire was simpler and more profound. Being single had never been the problem. Being trapped in a toxic family dynamic where my value was conditional on meeting their expectations had been the problem. Walking away from that toxicity, speaking truth even when it cost me relationships, establishing boundaries, even when it made me the villain in their story, that hadn't been selfish or cruel. That had been self-preservation. That had been self-respect. Looking back at that Thanksgiving dinner, at the moment I'd stood up and shattered Diana's perfect facade, I felt no regret. Yes, it had been painful. Yes, it had cost me relationships. Yes, there had been moments of profound loneliness and doubt. But it had also freed me from a lifetime of trying to earn approval from people who would never give it, from shrinking myself to make others comfortable, from accepting cruelty disguised as concern. Diane had tried to contact me twice more in the months since the confrontation. Once through email, once through a letter left with my father. Both messages followed the same pattern, acknowledging that mistakes were made while focusing primarily on her desire to move forward and her belief that family should forgive. Neither message took real accountability. Neither acknowledged the years of systematic cruelty. Neither recognized that reconciliation required genuine change, not just the passage of time. I didn't respond to either communication. Some people never truly change. Some people remain so invested in their victim narrative that they can't see the damage they've caused. Diane was brilliant at playing the injured party, at twisting situations to cast herself as the one who'd been wronged. Even now, even after everything, she couldn't look honestly at her own behavior. I'd made peace with the fact that my sister and I would probably never have a real relationship. That loss grieved me sometimes. The death of what could have been if she'd been capable of genuine connection. But I didn't grieve the relationship we'd actually had, built on hierarchy and cruelty and conditional acceptance. That relationship deserved to die. My mother remained at arm's length. We spoke occasionally, surface conversations about weather and work, but the depth wasn't there, and probably never would be. She'd shown me clearly that her love came with conditions, that her approval required I accept treatment I didn't deserve. I'd stopped seeking her validation, stopped hoping she'd suddenly see me clearly and apologize meaningfully. That hope had kept me trapped for years. Releasing it was painful but liberating. My father and I were rebuilding slowly, carefully, with clear boundaries and honest conversations. It would never be the relationship I'd wanted as a child, but it was real in a way it had never been before. He showed up when he said he would. He listened without judgment. He was learning, late but genuinely, to be the father I'd needed all along. Some family relationships could be salvaged with work and time, others couldn't. Knowing the difference was its own kind of wisdom. I'd learned that peace doesn't come from being accepted by everyone. It comes from accepting yourself fully, from honoring your truth even when it costs you, from choosing people who see your worth rather than begging those who don't to finally notice you. I'd learned that being alone is infinitely better than being with people who require you to betray yourself for their comfort. I'd learned that chosen family can be stronger than biological family, that love isn't automatically conferred by shared DNA, but must be earned through consistent action and genuine care. The most powerful lesson, the one I wished I could tell my younger self sitting at that Thanksgiving table absorbing Diane's mockery, was this: your worth is not determined by your relationship status. Your value is not measured by whether you meet someone else's timeline or expectations. Your life is not less meaningful because it looks different from what others think it should. Speaking your truth might cost you relationships, might make you the villain in someone else's story, might bring temporary chaos and pain. But the alternative, staying silent, accepting abuse, shrinking yourself to maintain false peace, that costs you something far more valuable. It costs you yourself. As winter settled over Chicago and holiday lights began appearing in windows throughout the city, I stood in my apartment looking out at the lake, thinking about the year that had passed. I thought about the woman who'd walked into her parents' house last Thanksgiving, dreading dinner, armed only with the determination to survive it. I thought about the moment she'd stood up and spoken truth that detonated a family's careful lies. I thought about everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. That woman had been brave in a way she didn't fully recognize at the time. She'd been stronger than she knew. She'd started a journey that led here, to this moment, to this hard-won peace. I wasn't the same person anymore. I'd been forged by fire, tested by isolation, tempered by having to choose myself when no one else would. I'd learned to stand alone. And paradoxically, learning to stand alone had allowed me to build genuine connections with people who saw and valued me fully. The life I was building now wasn't the life my family had wanted for me, but it was authentically mine, built on truth rather than performance, on boundaries rather than obligation, on self-respect rather than the endless pursuit of approval I'd never receive. So, here's my question for you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and keeping yourself? Have you stayed silent when you should have spoken up, or spoken up and faced the consequences? Drop a comment and share your story. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these struggles makes all the difference. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel because I share more stories about navigating difficult family dynamics, setting boundaries, and choosing yourself even when it's hard. And please share this with someone who might need to hear it, someone who's struggling with similar issues, someone who needs permission to put their own well-being first. Your support means everything. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, that your truth matters even when others try to silence it, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and everyone else, is to stop accepting treatment you don't deserve. Here's to authentic living, chosen family, and the courage to walk away from toxicity even when it costs you everything. May you find your own peace, your own truth, and your own people who celebrate you exactly as you are.